he wanted to bring that kind of life into the Parisian theater world as he saw it, which he saw was a sterile and dead thing that was bent on endless repetitions of very bad 19th century work, to where the standard of success was simply the recreation of something that was made 50 years before without deviation or flaw. And, you know, I wanted to bring something of that synergy into Sandman. I wanted to physically change the way that people actually read the book and picked it up and actually looked at things. Some of the pages, for example, that to this day never been corrected. You know, we're supposed to be read while actually rotating the book. You know, the dream vortex sequences, you were supposed to be reading those while actually turning the book with your hands and rotating the pages.
There's also a particular spread in this show, which is pretty much the first time anybody's seeing it the way it's supposed to be seen, of Rose Walker in the bed.
Right.
Which is...
It's all supposed to be one continuous thing of a person having a tossing and turning knife. You know?
In the book, they've split it up between 2 pages back to back for no immediately apparent reason.
But, you know, little things that I got from, you know, like the Hitchcock Truffaut. Like, I mean, I pretty much had that thing committed in memory back then. You know, Truffaut's interviews with Alfred Hitchcock occurred over a period of about 10 years, which were essentially started from Hitchcock's first amateurish films when he was actually doing soundboards at the studio where he started in England, and proceeded right up until the last of the conversations occurred just after the release of Family Plot. So they span Hitchcock's pretty much his entire career. And the way Hitchcock approached the process of visual storytelling, because he started in silent films. And you film things differently when you don't have access to sound. And to a certain extent, this is kind of how you have to think in terms of comics. You know, so I was thinking things not in a theatrical way. You know, in which case, you know, you have a stage and there are actors on the stage and people exit left or exit right. But what about if people walk into the distance or come back out? You know? And this tied in with something that Dave Sim once said when he was talking actually about, of all people, Hal Foster. Foster knew how to draw, big capital D, which is one of the reasons why so many people trying to parody him or impersonate him fail miserably, because they don't know how to do it. You know, he was an academically trained artist, and you know, he could draw a figure from any possible angle. And when you can do that, you can economize so much in terms of your storytelling space and still get exactly the same effect with much more dramatic results than you would if you were simply drawing it side on as, you know, a stage. I don't know where I was going with that. We were talking about Hitchcock earlier.
We're talking about the various influences.
Right. Well, there were a lot of them. As you can see, I get very, very moving about
So I think a lot of people probably have heard, know about Cinnamon, the inspiration behind Death. But I kind of wanted to maybe know a little bit more about some of the real people behind the Endless. You are responsible, again, for the look of 5 of the 7 of the Endless, and I'm sure a lot of friends, acquaintances, family, whatnot have made their way into the book throughout the course of your run.
Yeah,
Can you talk about some of those real people?
Well, it's another aspect of that sort of opening the door for a synergistic response, is that rather than working from photo reference, which I had access to sometimes, but for the most part I drew the book from life. I just grabbed people and had them pose right there and just sketch it all out as I could. It was a lot faster than actually having to wait for film to be developed. That was not in the deadline. And as a result, anybody who ever posed for it brought a certain aspect of themselves to it. And again, that stands as a kind of a little record of the Salt Lake punk scene at that time. There were just so many people who were in that. And I must say, it's like half the people that I thank in my acknowledgments are not dead, from various things, either from overabuse or just bad luck. But just the staggering number of just people who died, to use that old Jim Carroll song, is kind of astounding. For a long time I thought Cinnamon was dead. Cinnamon was dead too, because she just sort of disappeared off the map somewhere around 1997, and nobody heard from her. The only references to her I heard were all in the past tense. Cinnamon was, Cinnamon had been. So, for a long time I heard that she was dead. I was overjoyed to find out she wasn't. It was like, ooh, charming person all the way around, very likable. But certainly there were a couple of people who actually posed as the Sandman that I'm certain are probably overdosing in the grave by now. You know, Delirium was kind of based initially on Neil's sketch that he provided for me, or actually the photograph that he provided. But in no short order, I basically met the character, you know, full flesh, actually in the form of my friend Barbie. I can't remember what Barbie's last name was, Barbara. But she was that character. No curls. She just had, you know, short, straight hair like a, you know, orange tabby cat. You know, just kind of like a big mop. A little bit like Simmons' hair, but just carrot red. And she dressed, acted, and behaved very, very much exactly like the Delirium character. You know, she'd wander around with a Barbie doll that didn't have a head on it, you know, and, you know, occasionally she'd have the head, but not the rest of the Barbie. You know, she'd be holding it by the, you know, holding by the hair and flipping it around. You know, just a few years younger than everybody else, and just kind of a riot in her own rather crazy, drugged out way. You know, prone to a lot of ripped up fishnets and mismatched shoes. Prone to kids, actually, most of the time. You know, my best friend John was the model for Destruction. Big 6'4" Scots-Irish guy with a massive pile of red hair and a King Arthur's beard. Capable of intimidating frat boys with a claymore. That happened. I'll have to tell you about that someday.
It's a good story.
Yeah. What drunk frat boys will do at 3 o'clock in the morning when they don't know who lives next door. Let's see. Despair was originally, again, a character that I couldn't relate to. I think I've softened a lot because I've had two friends who have died who very much match the character. It's in my memory. You know, they had rather sad lives that they kind of kept from everyone. You know, they both died of heart attacks in their mid-30s. You know, they were women, they were charming, nice, friendly, lovable, loved everybody around them, and secretly were very, very depressed. And ate a lot to kind of compensate for that until they just couldn't. So, you know, to a certain extent, they tint my view of despair. Desire was, to a certain extent, my friend Nissa, who occasionally posed as a Sandman, was also kind of in mind for Desire. Nissa was very, very, very tall, very thin. I mean, without the, you know, 6-inch platform fetish boots and the gigantic piles of spiky hair, without that, she was already almost 6 feet tall. And with it, she was almost like 6.5, almost 7 feet tall. Very, very tall woman. And, you know, very lanky. She jogged a lot. Surprisingly healthy for the fact that she looked very unhealthy. She spent her time making a lot of makeup time working unhealthy. She's a librarian, Danish literature major. I think one of the most charming gifts I ever received was when she dropped in after she finished up a 6-month fellowship, actually, at the University of Copenhagen. She actually brought me a piece of Elsinore Castle. Yeah, I know you were a Hamlet fan. Here, this is an actual piece of Elsinore. Cool. But she's also rather androgynous, you know, because she's tall enough to be a man. She's very square-shouldered and very lanky and very lean. And if she's wearing something tight enough, you can easily see that she still has a woman's hips. But, you know, if she's wearing those rubber fetish dresses and the like, you know, she looks like a big 6-foot-tall black skinny pencil. And, you know, she was certainly someone who informed the character of Desire. It was very, very androgynous. Neil always imagined Desire as being at that intersection point between David Bowie and Annie Lennox. Certainly appropriate. Yeah. Two outcroppings in this dimension of the same pan-dimensional being. To quote Douglas Adams. So, I don't know.
Everybody loves your collaborations with Sam Keith. I think they're some of the most loved pages in the book. Talk about working with Sam.
Sam's very dear to me. I mean, you know, Sam and Neil are kind of like the older brothers that I ever had. And, you know, they're both still very, very dear to me. You know, it was a pleasure to work with Sam, no matter how you put it. I mean, well, it was awful to work with him on those on Sandman 3 simply because of the way the editor wrote him. Put it this way, he related some things to me that frankly, I considered at that point unforgivable. And indeed, like not even 6 years ago, I had mentioned that little tale to a senior editor at Viking Penguin, and her jaw about fell through the floor. And said that, you know, if one of our editors behaved like that, it would be grounds for immediate dismissal. You know, so other than those times, you know, it was always a great pleasure to work with Sam. You know, he's great. Yeah, I think he's probably he's the one person alive that I would trust to use my work completely. I mean, you know, I enjoyed when Malcolm did it. And even to this day, you know, it's like whenever I use like razor blades for scratch outs and, you know, lightning effects on the edges of things, that's all Malcolm Jones. You know, and that's my own little way of keeping Malcolm alive. You know, it's like whenever I do that, you know, it's like, you know, Malcolm taught me this. And that's my own little memory of him. Malcolm was he was a world beater. He was amazing. I mean, you know, if Karen dumped on me for the entire afternoon, or, you know, just frankly gave me one of her threatening phone calls, you know, I could call up Malcolm and he would give you one of these 45-minute long endless pep talks. You know, and it's like you go on, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, she says I'm awful, you know, and it was like, you know, and, you know, after 45 minutes of this, you know, you'd be like, you know, like somebody just walking out of the Führer bunker or something in 1945, "Ja, Fräulein Führer, wie kann Fühlen?" You know, that's how it was talking with Malcolm. He could just pump you up from almost nothing, you know, because he was just so enthusiastic about stuff himself. You know, he was a great guy. But, you know, after he got mugged, again, you know, Sandman's great and terrible history. A guy, he went up to see his wife and kid, well, ex-wife and kid, again up in Toronto of all places. No, Buffalo. I think it was Buffalo. And he got attacked up there. A guy bashed a chair over the back of his head. He just lay there in the snow for a better part of half an hour bleeding before anybody bothered to call an ambulance for him. A massive skull fracture, concussion, the whole 9 yards. And after that, Malcolm was never really quite right. You know, and that's, I think, you know, when a lot of his bipolar stuff started, and that eventually led to his suicide. But, you know, he was having, you know, towards the end there, he was having double vision. He couldn't focus on much of anything, you know, word vision, all the classic symptoms of a massive concussion. And, you know, he had to delegate work to Sam, which is when Sam made my work on Sandman, for the Doll's House and the like. And at the same time, you know, George Pratt was picking up some movie chores as well. So, yeah, you know, Sam was, well, you know, Malcolm was also pretty good. I mean, he was a hell of a guy. He looked like Luther Vandross, you know, purple pomaded hairs, bleedy wounds, you know, mustaches, purple silk suits, and, you know, mustard yellow shirts, you know, bright pink ties and stuff like that. You know,
Sounds fabulous.
all silk and tailored.
Oh, I would have gotten along with that.
Oh, yeah, he was, yeah, he walked in and you could practice use spotlight turn on, you know, and he was a good penciler too. That was the really terrible thing is Malcolm never once got a chance to pencil Mission of Sandman.
I've seen the beautiful Malcolm's pencils.
Yeah, it's
They
like
are absolutely beautiful.
Some of these pages actually have these drawings of Sandman on the back of them. You know, or panel sequences and stuff. That was never me, that was never Sam, that was always Malcolm. And they're just masterful pieces of work, you know. God. You know, there have been plenty of times in my life, you know, since then where I really wished I could get one of those Malcolm pep talks. You know? But, yeah, he was one of the greats. I mean, he was nominated for a Best Maker Award the year he killed himself. And he always felt underappreciated. And I think if he'd somehow managed to stick it out for another 2 years, he would have probably won every major award an inker can win in comics. I mean, he was just a genius at it. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, we were kind of like family in some ways. I think a weird kind of, this is just my own little speculation about this, is that between the four of us, we actually had a band. You know, because Sam and I both play the guitar, Neil plays bass and piano, and Malcolm played drums and trumpet. And so to a certain extent, in our musical experience, we're kind of used to people taking up particular roles in the way that things work. And, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why we all got along so well, is we each kind of had a certain territory that we knew that we would kind of cover.